The Locked On Podcast Network presents the College Sports Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in college sports. From our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story. Why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The College Sports Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in college sports.
The Florida Gators, and more appropriately, Scott Strickland, Florida Gators athletic director, have announced that Billy Napier will return as the Florida Gators head coach.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators.
The Florida Gators have announced that Billy Napier is coming back. And before I even give an opinion on it, you're welcome to give an opinion on it. I know where I stand, but we'll talk about that in a second. I understand why they put out a statement. And by that I mean I know why Scott Strickland and the Florida Gators felt the need to put out a statement of, hey, we're bringing back Billy Napier to be the head coach of the Florida Gators once again in 2025. Because your recruiting class is terrible right now, right? And a big part of your recruiting class being terrible is, well, simply put, everyone thinks you're going to get fired, right? In fact, I'll put it in the chat now. Should the Florida Gators have brought Billy Napier back? And there we go. We've got the yes or no in there. But yeah, this is just brutal, ugly. And yeah, the Florida Gators are bringing back Billy Napier because your recruiting class is so bad. You had to put out the announcement that, hey, he's coming back. Because then, also think about it, you are less than a month away from early signing day or the early signing period. You put out this announcement and it's like, okay, well, Georgia, Florida State, Miami, Alabama, anybody else that you're recruiting against will not be able to come out and say, yeah, but Billy's not going to be there next year. Here's the thing. Florida's not going to end this year well. Or at least I don't think so. I think they win one more game. Florida State, depending on DJ Lagway and his status, I fully expect him to be out this week. But I feel like you just kick the can down the road, right? Because next summer, you're not going to have a good recruiting class. Right? I think we can all kind of chalk that one already. Next summer, you're not going to have a good recruiting class for the 2026 class. Okay? Because next summer is going to be the same thing as this summer, where it's like, well, he's on the hot seat. Because, and we spoke about this, a couple weeks ago, and since then we've also spoken about it, but if Billy Napier comes back for 2025, then the 2026 recruiting class is going to know that, hey, he made it through by the skin of his teeth, which means that next year he might not be here as in needing 2026, which means why would I commit to that? Okay, so that's why Scott Strickland had to put out the statement about whether or not they were keeping Billy, because then you knock out the question mark of whether or not he will be here. That does not make it a good decision. Just want to make that one clear. And I will also say this, that I first off, I think you should have announced it weeks ago if you were doing this. But I do think that this wasn't, oh, we were always committed to him. I don't like that people are doing that. I think that this is truly the embarrassment of Florida, because I think it is them saying keeping games close and playing hard is good enough at the University of Florida in 2024. And that's embarrassing. If you ask me, at least, I feel like that's simply not how it should be. But even Scott Strickland was like, oh, you can tell by the way these guys are playing. What the hell does that mean? I get they're playing tough. You don't win national championships for playing tough and losing games. You win national championships for winning games. And that's the goal, right? I said going into the season, I thought that this was a team that, would, I don't know, win 7 games with good coaching, but they don't have that. So I said 5 or 6 going out the whole summer. That was my point. That statement's about as important as the signature I put on the Columbia House subscription in the 90s. Don't know which statement you are referring to. But I will again say, yeah, I think that Scott Strickland felt the need to put out that statement because, which I'm assuming that's the statement that you were talking about, the entire statement, not a specific line. But that's why he had to put out that statement, just because it allows you to qualm that. And yes, you can say that it's not important at all. Sure. But as long as Billy Napier can say, hey, look at this, like, we're good here. I do think they're going to keep Billy Napier for another year. I don't think it's for anything other than they're fine with mediocrity. And let's call it what it is. Right now, so far, Florida has been a mediocre team under Billy Napier. And I don't think that they care about that. Because this isn't the first time Scott Strickland has committed to mediocrity. Because don't forget, Mike White was bad at Florida, and Scott Strickland gave him a contract extension and then fired him the next year or the same season. But Scott Strickland had given him a contract extension before. Because don't forget, they extended Mike White and Dan Mullen and then fired them both. So that's where we were at with that. It's tough. I will also say this. I hate the idea of keeping Billy Napier for another year for the same thing that I've been saying. Last year, people were calling for him to be fired when the recruiting class fell apart. And I said, you have to give him at least year 3. Hopefully, if he tanks, then the UAA gets canned, which they're not going to do because, again, like I've been saying, upper administration at the University of Florida, spineless cowards, spineless losers, whatever you want to use. So that's where I stand on them. But, I mean, it's just, it pisses me off. But I was always saying year 3 because he either turns it around or he doesn't, and that's when you get to fire him. Because for me, I think year 3 is a good time to know that a coach cannot win you a national championship. I think if they answer that question, which I think that Billy Napier answered the question of no, I cannot win you a national championship, then I think it's time to cut bait. If they give you at least a little bit of pause, if you go, hey, can he win you a national championship? And your answer is maybe, then I think it's a bit different. Then I think you give him another year. But I think Billy Napier has proven that no, he will not be the head coach to win a national championship at the University of Florida. I will also say that there are far too many fans right now victory lapping that he's coming back. If I told you he's coming back, he's our coach, he's this, he's that. Just because they're bringing him back, it does not mean that those of us who want him fired are wrong. It means that 1, we have higher expectations for the University of Florida, and 2, that the University of Florida may have made a bad decision. If he ends up working out, then sure, gloat all you want. But if he gets fired next year, need you guys to admit that you're the clowns that were wrong. He's 15-18. He's 4-4, and he's probably going to finish 5-7 again. Brutal.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And that winning $5 bet could be on an early Week 11 line in the NFL. There's a theory that teams get a bump from firing a coach, but what happens when they fire a coach and trade one of their best players? FanDuel is kind of buying the fired coach hype, as it feels like the New Orleans Saints aren't as much of an underdog as you might expect to the Atlanta Falcons. The game is in New Orleans, but the FanDuel has the Falcons favored by 3.5 points. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
You are Locked On Bama, your daily podcast on the Alabama Crimson Tide. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Which quarterback is going to play better in this game? Now, I don't want to spoil your prediction. We said predictions would be today. I might have a bit of a surprise for everybody tomorrow. I'm just going to let y'all know in advance. sort of a friend of a friend has a son who has his own podcast. He's 15 and he's a huge LSU guy. And I said, I think it'd be kind of cool if we did just a segment with an LSU guy who's 15 and try and get his perspective since you and I are on the backside of our lives.
Let's do it, because it's about time we had someone on the show that's more mature than the both of us.
I agree. So we might have him on for a segment tomorrow, I'm hoping, and just talk about what the youth thinks about LSU Alabama rivalry and stuff like that. And tomorrow will be predictions.
I'm going to ask him who all the 15-year-olds voted for in the election.
Boy, there are a lot of political jokes to make right now, and we have been instructed to make none of them.
Oh yeah, okay.
So, all right. But without giving your prediction of the game, which quarterback do you have more faith in tomorrow? Garrett Nussmeier or Jalen Milroe?
Who I have more faith in? Jalen Milroe. And by the way, that's saying a lot, because I think the world of Nussmeier. I think Nussmeier's fantastic. I pegged this from the start. If you want to consider the start, that Sunday night game against USC, I'm like, oh man, Nussmeier's good. This is trouble. He is good. He's a great passer. I think he's going to have a good NFL career. So remember his dad. People say, his dad's a coach. His dad's a former NFL quarterback. This is the son of an NFL quarterback, and who's been trained his whole life to be an NFL quarterback by his NFL quarterback dad. I mean, people talk about, Bo Nix around these parts. I mean, Garrett Nussmeier is just this is the Bo Nix story, but Garrett is a talented kid. But I think Jalen is more likely to have the bigger game. He's more experienced. He's played on these bigger stages more often. He's more of a dual threat, and boy, LSU has given up some serious performances to dual threat quarterbacks. Somebody pointed out earlier today on our BOL board, it was a great post about how everybody's talking about what Marcel Reed did to LSU. Check out what Lenora Sellers did to LSU, who I've been comparing to Jalen Milroe all season long. I think he's a younger Milroe. I think Jalen Milroe is more likely to have the bigger game, and I think one of my points about this game as a whole, Luke, is this. And this is elementary. This is almost like saying, well, whoever scores the most points is going to win the game. No, I'm not doing that, but I'm sort of doing that when I say Alabama won this game if Sunday morning the talk is Jalen Milroe and not Garrett Nussmeier. And I know that's an overstatement and silly, but to me it says a lot. Yeah, exactly.
Whoa.
Exactly.
I mean, Jimmy. You might as well. I mean, that is the
wheel
prediction equivalent of Lane Kiffin's injury report.
Like I said, it's not predicting whoever scores the most points wins, but I think it's a statement about LSU is going to win this game if Sunday morning everybody's saying, boy, Nussmeier guy's good. But if everybody Sunday morning is saying, why did we ever remove Jalen Milroe from the Heisman conversation, then Alabama won the game.
No, I agree with you. And I agree with you on some levels. I am nervous. I want to say Jalen Milroe is going to have the better game. I really do. I hope he does. The off week, I think, will help. Maybe the last half of Missouri helped him a lot because his confidence came back a little bit. Maybe he remembered who he was. He's Jalen Milroe. He's got fantastic scrambling ability. So use that. Don't worry about if the play is called as, hey, a design run, or don't worry if the play is like, hey, you're supposed to pass it here if he's open. If he's not open, take off, man. Right. You're a gazelle in a rhinoceros body. Don't use it.
I think both quarterbacks put up 350. Nussmeier almost all passing. Milroe passing and running. I think both are 350, and I won't be shocked if Milroe throws for 3. I think for all the talk about Milroe's legs, I think LSU secondary can be had, and Alabama's receivers are getting a bit underrated, undervalued. I think Ryan Rohr's back. I think Jeremy Bernard's a good player, and while we haven't been watching, Kendrick Law is kind of turning into a bigger thing each week. Cole Adams is out. That's more reps for Law. That's more reps for Kobe Prentice, kind of a forgotten guy. Now, Kobe dropped 3 games. There's no one that wants to play better than Kobe Prentice on Saturday, and he's getting opportunity with Cole out.
You know how many touchdowns Jalen Milroe has thrown since Georgia game?
Oh, wow. What a good question. 4.
You can't be silent.
4, because I always want to get it right. 4.
I know you got to just use that hunch, baby. Like
then I'm gonna be wrong more often than normal, which is saying a lot. But 4.
No, I think your overthinking is traditionally where you underthink. So I think that I would go with your hunch. But no, 3.
Coach, 3. Missed by 1. 3. God, that's not good.
That's low, man. It's low.
Yeah, we won't tell the whole story, but a coach one time told me once in front of the whole, not just in front of my whole team, in front of the other team, a college coach told me once in a camp, Stein, quit thinking, you're hurting your ball club.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And that winning $5 bet could be on an early Week 11 line in the NFL. There's a theory that teams get a bump from firing a coach, but what happens when they fire a coach and trade one of their best players? FanDuel is kind of buying the fired coach hype, as it feels like the New Orleans Saints aren't as much of an underdog as you might expect to the Atlanta Falcons. The game is in New Orleans, but the FanDuel has the Falcons favored by 3.5 points. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
This is why the Ole Miss Rebels are going to beat the Georgia Bulldogs.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels.
This is the game. This is the one that Ole Miss fans have been looking for, I don't know, a year. Ever since Ole Miss walked off the field in Athens, Georgia, the Georgia game was immediately on Ole Miss's football mind, in their consciousness. After Ole Miss got done with the Peach Bowl, everybody thought about that game. Everything has been building towards this game this whole year, not just season. And even with a loss at Kentucky, which a lot of people thought that kind of took away what this Georgia game could mean, even with an overtime loss against LSU, everybody was worried about what and how it's going to affect this matchup. And Ole Miss is getting their Georgia Bulldogs matchup with everything on the line. This is fantastic. And I think Ole Miss has a real shot to win this game. And that is because of these reasons. Ole Miss has the better quarterback for less than ideal conditions, and Jackson Dart might have the better quarterback either way. Number 2, they have every intangible going for them in this game, including Las Vegas. And I pay attention to what they say and what they do in Las Vegas. We'll talk about that. And also, this will be the best defensive line that Georgia faces all season. And that's saying something when Georgia's already played at Alabama and at Texas, and they still have Tennessee on their schedule. But this defensive line is what's going to be special. It's where the rubber meets the road. And we'll talk about that unit and what that defensive line can do to affect Carson Beck in this game. But we'll start with the quarterback position, where I think that Ole Miss legitimately has the better option at quarterback, and playing at home in inclement weather, all of those things. It's really a good sign for the Ole Miss Rebels if Jackson Dart plays his normal football game. I'm not talking about what he did in Fayetteville, where he threw for 515 yards and 6 touchdowns. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about his normal 320-yard game, 2 or 3 touchdowns. If he does that, Ole Miss is going to be fine in this football game. Ole Miss offensively is in a position to where they can sling the ball around. They're not necessarily worried about bad weather and all of that because of how good and how safe Jackson Dart has been with the football this season. This season, Jackson Dart's 198 for 278. It's over 70% completions. He has 3,210 yards. That's the leading passer in college football. He's got 21 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Of those 3 interceptions, there was one that was really bad that I can remember against Wake Forest, but he hasn't really put the ball at risk at any point over the course of this season. He'll be going up against Carson Beck. Carson Beck, if you look at his numbers, it's okay. He's good. He's 190 for 290, 2,302 yards, 17 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. But here's the problem with that. With these numbers, it is including the games against like Tennessee Tech and their non-conference games, like everybody's stats are doing. This is what Carson Beck is doing in the Southeastern Conference. These are his SEC only numbers. He is 149 for 232, 1,782 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. Listen, I'd like to say that it's not going to get worse for Carson Beck, but here's the next stats. These are his stats in his last 3 games away from Sanford Stadium. That's Texas, Alabama, and against Florida. 90 for 155, 1,083 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. All of this matters because this is going to be a road game. This is going to be a loud atmosphere. This is a quarterback whose confidence is at least shaken. And I talk about this. We talked with Clint Shamblin from Locked On Bulldogs yesterday. Clint said, when he threw those interceptions, he came back out there and it was clearly in his head because he refused to throw the football for 3 drives. Stephen, it was in his head. It was not an arm issue. It was a between the ears issue. That right there is coming from Locked On Bulldogs, Clint Shamblin. And that is why I'm thinking that this game is Jackson Dart is clearly the superior quarterback. And if the weather is as bad as it's expected to be, in 2022, Ole Miss played Mississippi State. Ole Miss ended up losing that game, by the way. So I'm not calling a win necessarily off of it. I'm just pointing out that somebody played well. Jackson Dart was 30 for 40 in that game, 75% completions, over 300 yards passing, and led a 99-yard drive at the end of the game that would have been for the tying 2-point conversion. Ole Miss was down by 8 whenever he led that drive. They didn't get the 2-point conversion, but he completed the drive, the 99-yard drive. It was reminiscent of the John Forquet drive against Mississippi State in 1981. But Jackson Dart's arrival came in bad weather. I think Ole Miss is happy if bad weather is in the forecast and what's going on because of advantaged skill players. A lot of the advantages that the Georgia defense has gets taken away in soggy conditions because it kind of eliminates their ability to bull rush when it comes to a pass rush. Everything has to be speed based, and that is an advantage offensive line. It's a little bit easier to move the defensive linemen whenever there's inclement weather. So it's going to take away Georgia's 4- and 5-star advantage on the defensive side of the ball. The same thing's going to happen to Ole Miss, but Ole Miss's running game might be a little bit better than Georgia's running game, who I do not think they're going to have Trevor Etienne in this game. They're going to be relying on Cash Jones. And honestly, let's be real. If a Georgia running back comes out and has a day against Ole Miss that you've never heard of, it surprises no one because of how deep they are and how good they are playing football. But if you just look at it straight up, the analytics, the stats, all of that stuff, it's advantage Ole Miss. The advantage that Georgia has is they're the most talented football team in all of college football. If they play their absolute best, and I've said this all week, if Georgia plays their absolute best, they are winning the football game. There's nothing that anybody can do in college football. This is an Ole Miss thing. This is a college football thing. But if Georgia helps you out, which they've shown the ability to do this season, they've done quite a bit, and that bell curve comes down to where that ceiling gets down a little bit lower and lower, eventually your team's ceiling will be over that and you'll be able to outperform them. Now, it's not going to take many mistakes for Ole Miss to be at the level to where they can capitalize on Georgia. It's not like Georgia's playing Mississippi State here. I think that Georgia, if Carson Beck throws a couple of interceptions, they maybe don't score touchdowns on early drives. If Ole Miss gets a lead and is able to front run a little bit, that's advantage Rebels. And Jackson Dart puts them in a position more so than Carson Beck to do that. It's going to be imperative on Ole Miss's defense that they take care of this, because confusing Carson Beck and getting those explosive turnovers and explosive plays, that's going to be majorly key. I mean, Walter Nolan, J.J. Pegues, Santarin Perkins, Princely Amon-Mielon, all of those guys, Xavion Harris, Akello Stone, those guys are making plays on the defensive line. Chris Paul, TJ Dottery, really good. I'm expecting a front seven Alabama old style LSU style war from like 2011. That's the violence that I'm expecting on the front seven and the offensive line on both sides of the ball. You have to out physical this team. That's the start. Then you can worry about some of the cute stuff to win, but you have to have the physical mindset that you're going to come in and take over and beat the Georgia Dogs. You're going to push them. You're going to lean on them. You're going to do whatever you have to do to make it happen. If that happens and Jackson Dart has time, which I think he might in this game for reasons that I said earlier in this segment, you might see an Ole Miss team that can break loose a little bit against this Georgia Bulldogs offense.